Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If we could get back to the seats, we're going to get this final breakout session underway. Special thanks to Lime for that coffee break. Thank you very much for supporting the forum. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for staying around to the end. I think that's a sign that you're very interested in the discussions that we've had today, and we certainly hope you like the format that we've tried to achieve. Want it to be a very participatory type of format, a very discussion-oriented type of format. What I'd like to do is really just start by just introducing the panel, some of whom you already know. They were introduced earlier, so maybe we save a little bit of time. To my left, I'll just go down the line. I'll let them introduce themselves, maybe give us a little bit of background. Except for our fine gentleman here, I think we know you. And
moving on.
But no, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Tristan Hydes, Deputy Chief Officer, Ministry of District Admin Works, Lands and Agriculture.
David Watler, VP of Production at CUC. Been with the company about 17 years.
Gary Austin, I'm the executive for the Caribbean, bringing our global strategies to the region and trying to make them relevant.
I'm Julia Frederick Van Gendren, Director of the Water Authority of the Cayman Islands.
And I am Brad Watts. I am the Director of Business Development for Baden Holdings, which is a family-owned and operated business here in the Cayman Islands, has been since the mid-50s. And I've been on board with those folks since, I think, 2006.
Great. Well, thank you very much for participating in the panel. I'm just bringing us back to 2 years ago, when we all gathered here for a forum actually at the Marriott. We actually sent a survey out for the Chamber of Commerce. We asked the business community what they felt were the most important economic drivers for our future. We then looked at the manifestos of the governments, and we also asked the associations for their input. Then we gathered at the Marriott. We had 125 people that gathered over pretty much a full day. And we came up with 5 drivers, which is the basis of the Future of Cayman initiative. This initiative was moderated by Gary from IBM. And the basis of really one of the discussions at the infrastructure was that we wanted to look at a smarter infrastructure. What does that really mean? So if you look at this slide, you kind of get the intent of what we were trying to achieve. It's over 2 years later. And obviously, you've seen the strategic report card in the Chamber magazine. It shows what we were able to achieve during that period. Because no report should sit on a dusty shelf. The report needs to be accessible. You have to assess it, you have to see what the achievements are, and you have to see what the cost-benefit analysis of putting those strategies into action. That report is phenomenal if you read it. We have a lot of successes, but there's still some disconnects. There's still disconnect with this driver in terms of infrastructure generally. We've heard through the first 2 or 3 breakout sessions before this that really in some cases we're still speaking at each other than with each other and working on a strategy for the future. So what I want to dive into in this panel discussion is really what is build a smarter infrastructure. What does that really mean? It means connectivity. It means integration of systems. It means creating a society that not only benefits the business community, but the guy who is actually in his home in West Bay or Baden Town and can actually pay for a government service through a mobile device. It's as simple as that. In some cases, we're getting there, but there's still, as you heard from the previous panel discussion, we can't even agree maybe on a framework for a data and communication strategy as a community. There's lots of competition. And that's important. Running the Chamber of Commerce, I definitely know that's important, and profit's great. But as a vision for a community, we kind of need to tear down these walls and start bringing these synergies together. So I'm going to start the discussion right now with Gary, because Gary was the moderator for the Future of Cayman Forum in 2010. Gary, you have vast knowledge in IBM. You've been all over the world. You see what smart systems mean to communities. Give this audience some indication as to what you define as a smarter infrastructure.
Okay, so let's first of all pause on the word infrastructure and call it an enabler. Because I really think it's not about the infrastructure, like it isn't about the size of the pipe or the cost of what it costs to use the pipe. It really is what the infrastructure enables. And what it enables is outcomes. Better outcomes than you have today. And I'll give you a live example. I was with Mary Rodriguez for quite some time yesterday talking about something I'm finding all over the region is when a child falls out of the system, they become a problem in the system, in the classroom, in the community, to police, often showing up in emergency rooms if they're drug overdosing. But within the system, and I'm going to take Will's system term and use a different term, we're in a complex world to solve these problems. It's called the world of the system of systems. The systems have got to integrate, and if you integrate the systems properly, you will have data, and that data, applying analytics to them, will allow you to get insights to things you didn't see before. Like why this child is not performing in school or behaving in school is a home problem, a community problem, a lack of self-esteem problem. You can't fix that in the silos you have today. But with the system of systems that allows you to run case management and analytics to look at how those things come together and do predictions, you want new outcomes, which is children that have the right environment or interventions to help them get the right environment. So it's a system of systems, and it's not infrastructure, it's the enabler of outcomes. The outcomes you expect, not focusing on the inputs. The systems we have today focus on the inputs, and we count the inputs, and we wonder why the outcomes don't happen. So that is the smarter world, but just to underline it, and I'll use my water example I used before, SMART is about 3 elements. I did this presentation 2 years ago, for those of you who remember, and it has 3 elements. One is called instrumentation. Make dumb things smart. Give the student a student record. Give you a health record so you can keep track of the inputs, the medications, the doctor services, those kind of things, and then integrate that data and apply analytics to it so it can look at the interactions of the data and predict what will happen. So that is the smarter piece, and that is the fundamental for all we talk about: water, buildings, child outcomes, health outcomes, etc.
Now, David, I know you and I have had conversations numerous times, and I think there have been efforts in the past to kind of bring the players of infrastructure together. Where do you think we're at today in that conversation? You know, when we look at the driver and investment in critical infrastructure, do you think the communication between all of the key stakeholders is really one that is beyond this conference, that's happening organically? What's your perception on our efforts to bring everyone together for the conversation?
Well, I think it happens with some of the private infrastructure providers, but in terms of a collaborative effort, with the government, I don't think that's happening to the extent that it needs to be. I think the government is the owner and service provider for most of the national infrastructure, and the state that we're at now, for the infrastructure to get to the state where it's competitive with other regional players, that we need more collaboration.
And Tristan, from your perspective at the ministry, obviously your ministry is one of the widest range ministry of them all. You have a lot of responsibility, a lot of areas. In your perspective, do you feel as though there's disconnection, or you have a different perspective since the private sector come to you? How do you engage in that?
I think there is some disconnect, and I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to it, but we are certainly from the ministry level, we're certainly willing to bridge that. I still think, and maybe it's just a kind of a personal side of things, but I still think that the private sector has the ability to drive that a lot easier, for lack of a better term, than the public sector. I think the public sector should really just try to more facilitate their aims, and right now, from the private sector perspective, I don't know if there's as much cross communication as there should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, in 2001, the United Kingdom went through this process. They had thousands of infrastructure projects across the United Kingdom. I think an earlier panelist alluded to it. They narrowed it down to 500. And they said, and then they prioritized what they felt in terms of their vision for the future. of their country, and they narrowed it down. They prioritized, and they're working, they're spending funding towards those areas. Just throwing out to the panel, I'll start with maybe Julia. I mean, do you think that's where we need to start the process, where we kind of assess all of what we need in terms of bringing a collaborative infrastructure together, and then listing them all and then starting to prioritize?
Well, I have heard about, and I've actually just seen for the first time today, the UK's National Infrastructure Plan for 2011. And to tell you the truth, just looking at that and how easy it was to read, I think the process that they went through in the United Kingdom to produce such a document must be something that we can jump on or utilize a similar process. Cayman is a lot smaller. And we have been able, with the national energy policy, to actually put private sector, government together and sit down, hash out a lot of things, and put together a document that is now being reviewed by an independent consultant. But to me, that is a way that we can work towards getting our own national infrastructure plan. And I think it has been a lot of ad hoc development. We hear of the many big plans, which, for instance, the Dr. Shetty with 15,000 employees in 15 years, that is going to have a tremendous impact on every type of infrastructure here in Cayman, because it's not just those 15,000 people in 15 years, it's all of the patients, the associated family members, et cetera, that will come with them. And if that is going to happen, we need to kind of have a plan to address it. I see, and I'm actually a little bit surprised that we don't have representation here today from the Cayman Airports Authority and the Port Authority. I mean, these are the two major infrastructure areas that are going to impact a lot of other things. And it would have been, I think, very helpful to see them around the table so we could at least have initiation of a dialogue. If I can continue a little bit more, Will, I think also that, although Tristan, you mentioned that maybe the private sector has to drive this, I think it's going to take hand in hand, walking together to get this through if we're going to come up with anything. And it may even be something that the government has to take the stand and maybe develop a center or a special area within some part of government that has the capacity and the authority and the recognizability to help to drive this, whether it's the Deputy Governor's Office or whether it is in DALA or even down to departmental level. But honestly, I think it has to be higher than just a departmental level to have the impact and influence to draw on the private sector and to get the work done, because this is not going to happen within 6 months.
Well, again, we look at the UK. In the UK, they did the Prime Minister right at the top level. They asked the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. They felt it was so important, because it's a money item, that person is going to chair a new cabinet committee on infrastructure to drive the government's infrastructure program. Is that a model that could work here? Tristan?
Well, just to back up one little bit, I think the energy policy is a very good example of private sector, public sector working together. And again, there was some resistance to it, but it was something that the ministry insisted on, and we drove it pretty hard. And I think it's going to be really a nice piece of work. It probably won't be perfect, but I think moving forward, I hear it from the ministers actually. They do want to drive that forward. They do want to have that collaborative effort. So, who takes it? I think that's more of a political or policy decision that, once they make that decision, we will get on board, because from our perspective, you know, they give us their marching and we'll do
absolutely.
it.
And Brad, from your perspective as a private sector provider of infrastructure services, again, do you think there's enough collaboration? I mean, you know, I know we've had the conversation in the previous breakout session about the telecom companies putting in infrastructure on the roads, and we heard from Mr. Archibald that really that's a responsibility for them to approve and maybe bring the partners together. I mean, from your standpoint, you're just providing a service in trenchless technology and you're just going to do the road. But at the end of the day, from your perspective, wouldn't you like to see more collaboration so that when you do whatever technology you do to put in infrastructure, that the partners are at the table and you can share those costs to put that infrastructure in?
Absolutely, and I think the key here is communication. Our general manager of trenchless technology spent the last year in one of the focus groups on the energy policy, and it's enabled us to have better relations with some of the other entities here, such as CUC, Water Authority, Cayman Water, and that's really those discussions have enabled us to achieve a common goal, to achieve our objective, which is to improve the infrastructure or to make it smarter. But it's going to take communication, it's going to take working together, and it's going to take some. It's going to have to be a measurable. At the end of the day, a measurable item in order to, see if we're making improvements. But communication is definitely the key, and us being around the table now with the energy policy and so forth is the best start.
Now I'm going to make this interactive, so I'm going to go in the audience a little bit, and I'm going to maybe select a couple of people to ask a couple of questions about what you think a national infrastructure policy needs to have as part of it, and who is going to collaborate. If we can just pull up the next slide. So that's the objective that we set in 2010. So again, you can read that fairly clear. We heard the comments about the port and the airport. And we have representatives, Richard. I mean, Richard, if we can get Richard the mic. What are your views? I mean, you're here today as a delegate sitting through this, and you hear Mr. Thompson tell us that we have another diversified the economy strategy, and we should all welcome that because we've been talking about diversification for 25 years. But finally, we have something. Now, Mr. Thompson then told us that within a certain period of time, he's going to need roads, and he's going to need a larger airport. And then we heard in another panel discussion that the monies for the segregated accounts really are just in a pool. They're not being earmarked in the right direction. So from your standpoint at the airport, what is the likelihood that we're going to see the airport ultimately expand to meet the needs of this growth?
Well, I'm sorry that the airport's authority isn't here, and I can't even apologize on their behalf because I don't know why. But
they were invited.
From the civil aviation point of view, our interest is to see the whole aviation infrastructure, not just the airport, but air navigation facilities and whatever, that encompasses air transport, develop in a meaningful way to sustain development and growth of our economy. We've seen it from the mid-90s that the airports needed to be expanded, and not just from the terminal itself, and that's why in the late 90s, early 2000, we embarked on a master plan. So it definitely is a need for the airports to be expanded, but even more so, we've had discussions with not just this government, but governments in the past, of setting a national air transport policy, because I think we're lacking as a country. What is our goals for air transport into the country? And it's not just about tourism. Air transport impacts every facet of our economy. The financial industry, the hotel sector, everywhere. So that I see is also a major part of our infrastructure plans to have a national air transport policy. So all the key players that are here today need to be around the table, and I really don't see the difficulty in, as a small jurisdiction as we are, in us getting together and bringing things to the table and put it in a meaningful way as you have described what the UK has done.
Now, when we look broadly, the U.S. Virgin Islands and Bermuda are both announced airport expansion plans. They're both competitors in some way. And so, again, and I also understand, maybe Gary can go further into it because you have more knowledge on it, that they're putting in smarter systems into their airports to allow their arrivals to, to have some certain things that are part of that grid that we talk about. So I know maybe in the 2002 plan there was some of that, but again, it's a long time ago.
Well, one of the big frustrations, even with the airlines of the region, the Latin American Caribbean region airlines have done tremendously in upgrading their fleets. Right now, the fleets in this region are the youngest probably in the world. The fleets are averaging six years old. We have Latin American airlines that are taking deliveries of 787s now. But what's happening is the infrastructure like airports and the navigational facilities that would make their movement more efficient are not keeping up with what the airlines themselves are doing. So, having one segment doing all they can to develop to make it more efficient and having the other segments not keeping up, it affects the whole equation.
Now, Gary, maybe you can kind of provide us some insight.
I'd love to, and I think always when you get outside and you get a perspective of what others are doing, it's always helpful, and probably the most profound with me a few months back, I was sitting with the minister and the BVI, and they were talking about expanding their airport. We are working with airports in Bermuda and BVI in particular with our developer, Sir Robert McAlpine out of the UK. And in that regard, it's almost stunned me. I was sitting with the minister and the financial secretary, and the dialogue was from the financial secretary. He says, do you know what it'll do for the coffers of BVI if we can extend the runway and create an environment that will attract the billionaires from Europe with their private jets? That is what's motivating them to do that, which means the terminal is there. It's got to give them a welcoming environment, but what they're trying to do is get them to come to the BVI, he said specifically, and not Antigua, because they want to give them the experience they'll want to experience, not just at the airport, but throughout the country of BVI. Sailing, beaches, all those kind of things. So to me, it's always about what is the vision, and the vision is probably bigger than what you anticipate it in the traditional way of looking at it, whether it's to serve a hospital or a business type environment. So as they say, the future isn't what you think it is or what it used to be. And that's what is the challenge, I think, and how you mobilize people to be a part of that vision and see the outcomes that could happen. And they're typically not traditional.
Now, the other big issue that we've talked about for some time is ports. And we're fortunate to have Alistair with us. And Alistair's going to give us a great update on where we're at with the port.
Oh my God.
Is this a dangerous situation?
Thank you, Will. This is a bit of a surprise. In fact, I didn't even wear a collar and tie today, so I really didn't expect to be addressing this wonderful group. And with apologies to the panel, who really should be doing all the speaking. Let me just take 2 or 3 minutes of your time to try and update the port, because I think it's important that everybody understands where we're going and where we've been. It's been under the radar since I came aboard 5-6 months ago, and that was deliberate on my part, rightly or wrongly. And I'm sure in this room will be people who will debate whether it should be under the radar or not. It was under the radar deliberately because I did not want to see the negotiations with the Chinese harbour the contract being negotiated with China Harbour on the radio or in the press. So it was kept under the radar deliberately.
Just to warn you that the press is here right now.
That's fine, I don't have a problem. The press can quote me. I don't have a problem at all.
CNN.
I did not want the contract negotiated in the press or, in fact, on the radio. And I think it would have been very unfair, not just on the negotiating team, but on China Harbour and also on the people of the Cayman Islands. Because quite frankly, every time there's a project proposed here, The community breaks up into special interest groups, and each has his own way of doing things, and nothing will ever get done while people are still arguing. Brief background. This project, the port, the cruise ship facility, has been discussed since probably 1982, and a succession of governments from both sides of the House have tried and failed to put a project together. There have been reasons for that. The current government got to the situation in 2009 where they put out through the Port Authority expressions of interest, and a process was started with pre-qualification of a number of contractors who had shown an interest to build the port project. Now, I want you to bear in mind that this port project has got no money from the government, no money from the Cayman Islands. There is no equity, no investment, no funding, no money at all from the Cayman Islands. And we were looking for a partner to supply all of the funding, provide the design, do the construction, and continue over a period of whatever term of years to maintain and help operate the cruise ship port. Part of that operation was also improving the cargo facilities and making the cargo handling more efficient. So the process was started in 2009. A number of contractors expressed interest. 4 contractors were chosen. I know that one of them is here in the room. 2 contractors were then selected as the favored people to negotiate with. Negotiations were carried out with those 2 contractors. Now, this is not the forum to go into the whys or the wherefores on how or what caused the negotiations to stop, be withdrawn, be pulled, or whatever. Be it fair to say that the negotiations with those 2 contractors were ceased. By that time, and in fact that was some 2 years later, China Harbour had been introduced to the government through a Jamaican. A Jamaican had come here, introduced China Harbour. China Harbour had not qualified on the original list. By the time 2011 came along, China Harbour were found to be qualified. And since none of the other contractors were on the list at that time, negotiations started with them. I came aboard 5.5 months ago, and my task was twofold. One was to research the history behind the cruise ship negotiations from 2009, and the second was to take the negotiations with China Harbour to a position where we could sign a contract. The research was done, processes were put in place, reports were made and presented to the right people, and the negotiations, which were intense. The Chinese are very, very hard people to deal with, particularly when you don't speak Mandarin. And we got to a stage 2 weeks ago where we were in a position, effectively, to sign a contract. The China Harbour were about to become partners. Now, one of the things that was not mentioned, Will, if I have a second, this morning...
Just maybe 2 more minutes.
One of the things that was not mentioned this morning about private partnerships is that what the Cayman community doesn't understand about PPP is the fact you're taking on a partner for a long-term period. And that partner, if he's putting up all the money, will expect to get a fairly reasonable return for his investment. He's not putting up the money for nothing. He's not just getting the interest on the money. He expects a return on his investment. And the Chinese were no different. The current status is that the job has been pulled. The Chinese are no longer in negotiations, and we have been asked by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to go back to square one, to go back essentially to 2009, do expressions of interest, pre-qualifications again, do a request for proposal, and go through the whole process where we will invite contractors again to become partners of the government.
And if I could stop you there for a second, Alistair. So, Tristan, is that your ministry?
No.
Okay. That's the premier, is that the
You wanted
tourism?
to be your
That's the
minister.
Tourism Development and Finance Ministry, right?
The instructions came from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
No, I understand that. I just want to know, now you said we're at a stage where it's going to be resubmitted.
Correct. That's correct.
And so who's handling that process
The
now?
ministry and partnership with the Port Authority.
The Ministry of
The ministry,
Tourism,
the one you've just described.
Finance and Development.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Could I also just say, just very quickly, that there is a subtle difference between the port and the organization and the airport and the organization, in that whilst they're both authorities, they both operate under different regulations. I think, Richard, I'm correct in saying that. The other big difference is the fact that the airport authority have money and the port authority do not, which is a huge difference. It gives the airport authority more flexibility. But look, the cruise ship dock, the cruise ship facility is a very, very important part of the future of the Cayman Islands. Not just from the port itself, but for developing the economy over the next 10, 15, 20 years. If we can get 2 million people coming through the port, in 3 years' time, we'll inject $200 million throughout this community. It's very, very important. We must put what has passed as water under the bridge. It's passed, it's done, we can't undo it. What we must do now is move forward fast track, we must move forward positively. Next week we have somebody from the FCO coming here to go into sessions with us, and we will try in that stage to see the best way forward to ensure that whatever process we put in place will fall under the rules and regulations of the new FFR that's now law. And that will start as of next week. So that's the purpose of the meeting with the FCO. One last point. I would like to just settle some myths about the Chinese contract. It was said that the contract would be $300 million and more. A myth, with a guaranteed maximum price of less than 250. It was a myth that there was 100,000 square foot of retail to be constructed in the contract. There was no upland development planned in the contract at all, none. It was a myth that the Chinese were coming in to take over downtown retail. That was never planned and has never been on the table. It was a myth that they were going to take all the passenger taxis for 40 years or for 50 years. Not the case. It was also a myth that they were going to build labor camps with 600 or 800 people. Not the case. It was mandatory in their contract that they employ local contractors, use local suppliers, and utilize local equipment.
Well, thanks for that update, Alistair. Appreciate it. Give him a round of applause. That was a great talk. Thank you very much for that update. And Alistair, just appreciate that you opened up the conversation on the port, because we actually wanted. Now, if we look at the Develop a National Infrastructure Plan, and again, we look at the first action is identify and prioritize a list of major infrastructure projects and confirm funding sources and time plans. So I'm going back to the panel. Do you think we can all agree to do that one? Which is identify and prioritize the list of major projects. Now, Tristan, I go back to you. Is that a responsibility of your ministry to do that?
It's a significant part of it, yes. And I think it can be done.
Okay, excellent. Well, then maybe that's the starting point, you know? Does the panel agree? I mean, for CUC, critical infrastructure and these expansion projects for diversifying our economy is going to have some impact on you as a business. I mean, I would have thought that this is something that you'd love to see.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it, you know, the impact on the economy. Basically, if you look at the UK's infrastructure plan, approximately 60% of their projects are anticipated to be funded by private enterprise. And I think with the debt restrictions with the FFR, that probably will be similar to Cayman, if not more so. Mm-hmm. So I think, number one, we need, we need a process for the 3P projects, and we need to give them more time. They're very complex. They're not easy to administer. So we need to start them earlier and give them sufficient time to get completed.
And Julia, I mean, you probably can provide the list of infrastructure projects that you're going to do as part of the Water Authority. Am I correct?
Yes, we do have a long-term development plan. Of course, you know, we've been in a little bit of a standstill for a while. But whatever happens, you know, there's still going to be needs with regards to water and wastewater infrastructure. And I mean, I agree with David as well, and Tristan, that this is something that the Dollar Ministry could assist with. And we would certainly be on board and participating in that. I think in terms of the private investment, that is a very good avenue for funds for infrastructure development. I think with government, it has to also be an open and transparent process. As earlier, I think in the session with our Auditor General, he spoke about that. And I think that gives everyone a better feeling about projects where there's private investment, that it's an open and clear and fair process. There's no secret deals anywhere. We're open.
Now I'd like to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have a general question about either the port, the airport, the whole idea of a smarter infrastructure?
If I could say one thing, though, I think, and I think it is an obvious point, but I think we're also we're suffering from our own success. I mean, back in the 90s, 80s, early 2000s, we were really on a roll in terms of development, and we didn't really pay attention to the high-level, big picture infrastructure plan, you know, and we just were more concerned with the bottom line, making lots of money, and while individuals or individual entities jumped up and screamed about, you know, we need to have a strategy, we need to have an infrastructure plan, a development plan, et cetera, et cetera. Our success didn't make us listen, and the brakes have been pulled, and we're here now, and that's the part of the problem. How do you now start thinking high level, big picture, not about a specific project really? That's why I think the energy policy is such a good starting point, because it thinks big picture. It doesn't say go out and buy all electric cars or anything like that. It just gives you a broad, high-level document that you can work from, and the developers can, if we had an infrastructure plan, for instance, they'll know where they're going or what's happening. And that's, I think, how it needs to work.
Gary, before we toss
Yeah,
the
just a
first
very
question.
quick thing. When you use this term list and prioritize, I think listing is easy. I think prioritizing is very difficult. Let me give you a live example. In Jamaica, because their national energy policy is finished, they're now saying, what is the impact of this? And in discussions with the senior executives and the minister, it was, we need to go out and assess the impact, and they put everything around smart. And they use the term smart grid for many, many things, as we all understand what that means. And so what we're about to do for them very shortly is do a smart grid maturity model, which we've developed in conjunction with worldwide utilities, and we've now turned over to Carnegie Mellon to make it available to the world. And it basically goes out and says, what is the impact of smart grid? If we can look at the effect it has on transportation, on the utility, on the consumer, the broadband stuff I referred to earlier, you can now begin to prioritize, you can put benefits against it. So when you do the prioritization, if you've got a method to look at return on investment, those kind of things, it's a whole different kind of prioritization, and I think it's easier.
But at the same time, I think listing and how do I put this? Prioritization isn't as important as listing, in the sense that I think we can, and there's going to be a debate about, you know, if you're for or against or which government you like, and I really don't care about all that. But I think governments in Cayman have come far enough to know that if they had a listing, or if we set a listing, and they want to change that priority, that's their prerogative. You know, I think we're smart enough, we've come far enough for that. And if it's done properly, that it can be, you know, the procurement, all the other smaller elements of it can be followed. I don't think shifting a priority, if a government, changes and it wants to shift priority, I don't think it is, because I mean, once those projects are done properly and are on track, I don't think it's going to make a difference whether it's stopped or.
Okay. Well, first question.
Yes. Will, I notice that your Objective A that you've put up there, you mentioned, came about in 2010. It's interesting that here we are in 2012 and we're discussing exactly the same points. And absolutely none of those projects nothing has really developed. And I'm concerned that in 2014 we will be in exactly the same position until we ensure that on our major projects there is no political interference. There are no party politics and personal agendas that take place, because those are some of the things that have delayed major projects in the Cayman Islands and throughout the Caribbean in recent years. And just one comment on one statement Mr. Patterson made, and I just find it incredulous that at a time when, fortunately, the FFR is in place now, at a time when we want our government to be transparent and open, that he felt it was justified to negotiate a $220 million project with China Harbor in secret and sign a contract before anyone in the Cayman Islands were notified of what the terms of that contract were. And I am grateful that that was stopped, and that the process is apparently now going to be open and transparent, and we'll go through a tender process.
That was a comment, right? It was.
Yeah, that was it's a comment, not a question. But I guess my question is, what are we all what are we going to do to ensure that in 2 years we're not sitting here looking at exactly the same
that's
objective?
exactly why we're in the discussion, absolutely. I think you had one, but I'm going to toss it first to Paul and then come back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Will. I just have 2 points, really. I don't think they're not questions, they're observations. Say that from now. The first one relates to an observation that I've made in the panels since this morning, even though I came a bit late. And what I heard frequently, and I've heard this with respect to the infrastructure plans as well, is that we don't have a plan. I've also heard that we don't have a strategy, and I've also heard about 2 or 3 times that we don't have a policy. And what's really surprising is that we're still saying this. At some point, someone, somewhere, some group, some department, some chief officer, some permanent secretary, some policymaker, some lawmaker is responsible for having a strategy, a plan, a policy. So it's a little bit embarrassing, really, to say the least, as a citizen, that we keep saying this. And this is not something that can come from a private firm in the private sector. It can't come from the Rotary Club. It can't come from the kid in the school. It has to be driven by the public sector. So it's the first point. The second point relates to financing. The financing of infrastructure has changed dramatically over the past 3 decades in other countries all over the world. We are, in the past 6 or 7 years, we're starting to be introduced to this idea of the PPP, and culturally, we're a bit uncomfortable with this idea. It's important to mention it because in countries around the world, you have other nations technically having control of highways, bridges, and other parts of infrastructure in other countries. But those countries have evolved to such a stage where culturally the people, which is important because they inform the politicians, ultimately their actions, they are comfortable with this idea that over the next 20 or 30 years, someone else will control a key part of your infrastructure and maybe give it back to you. But the truth is, you won't be able to develop it unless you are comfortable with this idea that you enter a partnership where control, where management, where in some cases even legal title transfers to the investor who takes the risk and reverts back to you, because you're not going to be able to finance it by going to a bank like you did in 1965. We're just no longer in those days. So, as someone said, I think it was David, with the FFR, with the debt restrictions, we are going to have to start explaining to people that this is a legitimate way to go forward, and it will mean that some other entity may have control, may have management, may even have legal title to some portion of your infrastructure so that you can build it for your country, for your economy, and for your people. And I think that message is missing. Because what happens is we get scared when we hear this thing, and we say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Who's going to take over the airport? Who's going to take over the port? Who's going to control our roads? And the truth is, culturally, with respect to that specific issue, we're about 15 years behind. So we need to raise that level of discourse, raise that level of awareness with the people, because ultimately, the politicians won't do anything if that is the way the people are thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. I just go back to the panel, though. I think Paul's first point was about the leadership really needs to come from the public sector. Again, Tristan, your ministry is so diverse. In the United Kingdom, they felt it was so important that they pulled infrastructure itself out and gave it specifically to a group. I mean, are we asking your ministry too much to do this, or is it maybe your full-time job, and then I don't know, I'm just throwing it out, I just don't know what the answer is.
Well, it's certainly me that's going to do it. I mean, speaking frankly, that's something for the politicians to decide. And if they work it or engineer it that way, I'm not going to.
Absolutely. I think Eric had a question. Mr. Heber had a question.
You just said exactly what I was going to say. There is one source that comes from you to deal with infrastructure.
Okay. This question here.
Will, could I just make a comment to the last comment? Trinidad did an interesting thing a couple of years ago when the Manning government was there, not long before that government left. But he appointed Minister Kennedy Swartzeng, who was a very tactical minister, understood the technology side. He had the policy side of government, and he had the IT side of government, but he had the savvy to know how to look at large infrastructure. And so they had a governance model where he had a vote in anything that was over $5 million in expenditure. So all the agencies had to run it by him and bless it with him and the cabinet. So it's just another structure that may be of value.
This question was for Brad Watts as sort of the true consumer on the panel. As the business development lead for a company with over 50 years of presence in the Cayman Islands, what do you see are the three most important infrastructure needs to ensure Cayman grows and is successful for the next 50 years?
This is a setup. Well, I'll just name them. Energy, telecommunications, and what was the third one? You call me. They set me up here. You guys don't. You all know this old joke. And transportation. I think those are the three main two. And we're involved in all three of them. We're involved in all three. We like to get in on the eco-friendly side of things in the infrastructure. Trenchless technology is one where we try to protect the ecosystem by not tearing up the roads. Propane is an alternative source to diesel-powered energy. So we're more, Baden Holdings' point of view, and you asked about a company that's been ran for 50 years. That's the approach we take. And it's going to be important from here to eternity.
Any other questions?
Well, I'd just like to add up to something Brad just said.
Okay, when you get, I'll just.
Okay.
Question first. Okay, Max as well.
Thank you. I think we need to have the restoration of trust. We do not trust because we've been let down and let down and let down. In 1975, there was a draft development plan for the Cayman Islands. Had we followed that plan, the Cayman Islands would be totally different in physical development and cultural development as what we see today. When the politicians got hold of that, in 1977, they came out with a plan that is not even a poor zoning plan, because you can put a quarry in a residential district, and the unaccountable planning board will consider that over and over and over, the expansion of it in a residential district, and entertain it. That's a heavy industrial activity in a residential zone. One example. How do we get plans? Tourism Development Plan, 1992, thrown out the window. Vision 2008, thrown out the window. The Environmental Charter, 2001, thrown out the window. How do we get to a point of where these plans that have been rejected come forward? And I'm going to use the C word, corruption. Do you restore trust when people feel and they have the perception that honesty and integrity is in the place? And I would invite all the people here next Thursday night to go to UCCI, because that's the first of 3 lectures for a 2014 conference towards a corruption-free Caribbean. Dr. Trevor Monroe will be delivering a speech on corruption in the Caribbean. And hopefully it will lead to a formation of, we spoke about transparency earlier, which we don't have in the Cayman Islands, a chapter of Transparency International in the Cayman Islands. And I invite everybody. Bring your friends, enemies, and family. God bless. 6 o'clock next Thursday night at UCCI.
I don't think you can respond to any of that, but other than to say, because again, I think the delicacy here, we're talking political issues versus, it's a challenge and an interesting. Is there any other? Okay, just follow up on Brad's comment.
Yeah, Eric, that was a really great question from a consumer user as well as a service provider. But one of the things that I was hoping that Brad would have picked up on is everything that we do has to be sustainable. And we have to take it one step at a time. We can't provide the country with a huge solar panel of electric, but we can, one solar panel at a time, help grow the residential aspect of it. And Home Gas, Trenchless Technology, and Biden Holdings embraces the sustainability. Everything that I do and have done and the team does within Home Gas is to provide sustainable alternative energy and better lifestyles through this. Same thing with Trenchless Technology. It's, I want to say that it keeps us alive, because I wouldn't want to be out there trenching a big hole in the middle of 7 Mile Beach Road and have people throw bottles and rocks at me like they do. But what we do through Trenchless, it provides us a way to complete the infrastructure without creating too much of an impact on the social life of everybody that goes day to day back and forth to work. Again, sustainability. And I think everybody needs to take that word and look at it and apply that to everything that we do, from the infrastructure going forward to the increasing our populace so we can pay for some of this infrastructure. Because at lunch today, I had a discussion with some people. Everybody in this room can only buy so much from the people in this room before we run out of stuff. I mean, we just can't afford to keep buying. I can't buy from you, you can't buy from me, but so many times in a month. Then you take the people who go to the States or the UK and buy. It limits our actual financial resource here to pay for the infrastructure. So everything that we do in this country has to be sustainable from the very beginning to the end. We can't build a skyscraper without starting with the foundation. And that's what we fail to see when we look at some of the projects that we try to build and do here in our country. So, it has to be sustainable.
Could I respond to that? What is your political organization around sustainability? Do you have a department that does nothing but think about sustainability? Because I know 2 countries that do.
We have the brain trust of bond holdings for us. You know, I don't know what political.
I don't think we want to rely just on that. No offense.
I think we're going to have one more question. I think you have one. Or Shane has one in the back first, then we'll come back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we were here 2 years ago and we're looking at the same list, and that's why we made this driver of importance. We've had restrictions, both politically and from lack of interest from the private sector and public sector. So I'm here to engage everybody, and I'd like to show of hands who is affected by infrastructure in the community, their business or their ministry or their department. Can you put up your hand?
Who isn't?
Who's willing to put their foot forward over the next 2 years and make a change to this and join the driver group in some capacity? Can I show of hands? I got half of you.
We have a sign-up sheet. Leave your hands up.
Sign-up sheets outside. Just want to
Where's
make that
Leanna?
point.
I took a picture.
Thank
You
you.
took a picture?
I
Oh,
took a
see, smarter technology. Very good. All right. Remember, though, those hands, the ones who, I'm serious, if you're really interested in engaging, we have a sign-up sheet right at the Chamber of Commerce desk. Please let us know, because it's so vitally important. So we're about out of time now. I think this young lady has a question. Right in the front. Question, right?
I'm going to say this short as my height. CUC. When CUC came to the Cayman Islands, what was the development plan? We sold shares. Shares were sold to individuals to start the development of CUC in the Cayman Islands. Lime did the same thing. Shares were sold to the people of the Cayman Islands for the development of the Cayman Islands. Am I right? Do we still sell shares? CNB? Am I right? Yes. Every developed area of the Cayman Islands that is still here and is operating started on shares. Does anyone think, if we stop and think about it, that if we really wanted the docks to get on the road, we could do the same thing? It's something to think about. It's old school, but guess what? It works. The people of the Cayman Islands would have shares in their own docking facility if it is even half of the development of it. That is my little bit of wisdom today, short but sweet. What do you think of it, Mr. Heights? Mr. Wow. Think about it.
Oh my gosh.
Think about it.
Not his minister.
And I am
Ministry of District Admin, Works, Lands, and Agriculture.
Think about it. That is my short and sweet. Have a blessed
Thank you very
evening.
much. Give the panel a round of applause, please. I hope you didn't mind the format. I wanted to be more participatory, wanted to get a little bit more information out from the group. Delighted that Shane asked that final question. Please, before you go into the next plenary room next door, please stop by the chamber desk. Leanna's there. Just sign your name up. I need your email address so you can get involved in this group. The only way we're going to take this objective forward is if you get involved. And the more you're involved, the better. So thank you very much, and enjoy the next. And the survey forms, if you haven't filled them out, please do. Appreciate that very much. Right at the chamber desk. Thanks again.